Let's get on to a real threat. China. Now to some former prime ministers that are acting unbelievably recklessly. Here's the problem. China's been so aggressive, so threatening, warning now so often of a war over Taiwan that the Morrison government is suddenly scrambling to get us ready to defend ourselves properly. Last week, it tore up the ludicrous deal to buy dud submarines from France. Now we're going to build much better submarines, nuclear ones, with the help of Britain and the US. But, as I said last week, those subs might not be in the water for another 15 years, and we need them in less than 5. I mean, we need them now, really. And sure enough, today, Prime Minister Scott Morrison all but confirmed that one of the things he's now discussing in Washington with President Biden and with the British Prime Minister is to lease submarines from them in the meantime, and have their navies station their own submarines here in Australia.
The United Kingdom has indicated that they may station up to 3 nuclear submarines in Australia. Is that an option, and is there also an option for a similar arrangement with the United States? Are these options that Australia is looking at and may come up in the near future?
And a lot of the work that Minister Dutton has been doing is to work to see how we can bring other elements to that capability in an even sooner time frame. Now, that can involve the very things that you're talking about.
Now, this is extraordinary, and it should tell you how frightened the government is of war soon, needing now to rush foreign submarines here to help protect us, because the threat is real. But in the defence of Australia, there are actually 2 factors: the size of the threat and the size of the fight in Australians, whether they actually defend themselves. And today, was I shocked? Shocked by 2 former bitter prime ministers, both of them Labor, Kevin Rudd and Paul Keating. Now, Kevin Rudd, let's start with him. He actually wrote in a French newspaper, Le Monde, damning the Morrison government for dumping those French submarines, even though they're slower and easier to find and destroy than nuclear ones. Rudd said Australia had given France a stab in the back with its deceptive and misleading conduct. And for us not to warn France that we wanted different subs was not fair to our French strategic partners. It would also make China more paranoid. Now, it sounds to me like utter madness if Rudd thinks that Scott Morrison should have warned France well ahead of time that maybe he'd ditch this submarine deal with them if, by the way, France can get a new security arrangement with the US and Britain, which I might not, but I'm just giving you plenty of warning. I mean, really, seriously? Deal like that, that's idiotic. And the deal is now done. So why then is Rudd inciting even more anger about it in France when France is already talking about getting Europe to punish Australia by hitting our trade? How is Rudd helping Australia by inspiring even more anger? Then there's Paul Keating. I mean, what is it with so many of these former prime ministers? Paul Keating is also attacking this submarine deal, but he's more worried about us being rude to China, heaven forfend. He says it takes a monster level of incompetence for the Morrison government to forfeit military control of one's own state with this deal with the US and Britain. And by determinedly casting China as an enemy, well, it's creating an enemy where none exists. I mean, you've got to worry. Paul Keating was once our Prime Minister. Talking absolute rubbish like that? Wow. Because our government is not forfeiting military control of Australia. It is in fact looking for weapons and friends to make sure that we don't forfeit military control of Australia to China. I might just remind him what kind of country China is. Because this idea that Australia is turning China into an enemy is so nuts that I wonder what cave Paul Keating's been living in for the past 20 years. China has had a military build-up that's not been set up. It's massive. and it's stolen the South China Seas to our north, threatens to blow up any planes that comes near. It has killed Indian troops in clashes in the Himalayas, where it's trying to claim yet more territory, and has sent naval ships into Japanese water and threatened Japan. It has meanwhile crushed democracy and free speech in Hong Kong, while teaching Chinese children even how to fire mortars in preparation for trouble. And above all, China's dictator has threatened to invade Taiwan and told his military a couple of times now to prepare for war. So it's not just Australia that now sees China as a grave threat, imminent threat. So does the United States, Britain, Canada, European countries, Taiwan, Japan, Vietnam, India, and others. But not the great Paul Keating, who I should disclose for a while was on the International Advisory Council, very swish, of a top Chinese development bank. Not that that would, of course, affect his views on China. Paul Keating. His words here must give such comfort to China's dictator, who at the United Nations overnight gave a speech attacking our new security deal and issued an appeal which is just as unbelievable as anything Kevin Rudd and Paul Keating now say.
Democracy is not a special right reserved to any individual country, but a right for the people of all countries to enjoy. Recent developments in the international situation show once again that military intervention from the outside and so-called democratic transformation entail nothing but harm. We need to advocate peace, development, equity, justice, democracy and freedom, which are the common values of humanity, and reject the practice of forming small circles or zero-sum games.
So the dictator of China says he wants democracy, not these little alliances like ours. Democracy! That's just after he destroyed democracy in Hong Kong. And if dictator Xi Jinping really was serious and he wants democracy, let him now call free elections in China today. The lying hypocrite. And yet you now see in this country people, senior people, suggesting we trust this guy